Hey, it's Brian Burns, and welcome to this episode of the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Today, we've got Tiffani Bova back on the show. She's coming out with a book this week, August 14th. I think that's Wednesday, all about growth IQ. And you've heard of, regular IQ, you've heard of EQ. Growth IQ, I think, is critical because we're all trying to grow as individuals, as leaders, as CEOs or solopreneurs. Finding growth today is harder than ever. There's so many more competitors, so many more channels, so many false signals that we don't really know what to do. So how about coming up with a system? How about coming up with a proven approach, a creative way of doing it, whether it's going after a new market, a smarter market, or niching down? All of these things we have to consider. And, certainly for my business, I'm thinking 3 years ahead, because what I've learned is too many businesses are trying to chase where the puck was 3 years ago. And by the time they get close, it's too late. People have already moved on to a different platform, to a different medium, to a different approach, and they've been disrupted. And what they're trying to do is catch up instead of leapfrog. What I like to do is leapfrog, get in early on the things that are going to be super hot 3 years from now. Now, your horizon might not be 3 years. It might be 3 days or 3 months. And certainly in sales, it's usually 3 months. And the problem with that is that we usually have to plant the seeds a long time before that. And here we are kind of coming into the latter half of the year. We got to think about how do we finish the year strong? How do we plant the seeds for 2019 so that that's a great year? And think back on what do we wish we did a year ago to make this part of the year so fruitful for us. So let's get into the interview with Tiffani. I'll sum it up at the end. I'm also starting to offer up the courses, start the conversation, get the meeting, and how to close the complex sale for companies, customizing it for your particular team, having it private to you with n number of private sessions, customizing it to your exact customer profile and show you how to do it. I'm getting enormous success with the students that are in it today. They're getting meetings with senior level people and not selling a 15-minute meeting, but starting a conversation, getting a meaningful dialogue started with the company and actually enjoying it instead of the constant rejection and burnout that we see so often today. Also, as far as like the complex sale, we're running into Q4. I mean, Q3, we're all going to have a panic in a couple of weeks when Labor Day comes around. We're going to, get the sand out of our sneakers and get back to work. And we're going to find out that pipeline is pretty stalled and everyone's going to be running pretty hard. So what we need to do is really understand how the complex sale works, how to prevent it from getting stuck. I did a great episode this week with a buddy of mine, Skip Miller. I took his training a long time ago. It was instrumental in my development as a sales rep, and I evolved it quite a bit from there. So check that out on the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. Also, connect up with me on LinkedIn, and my website is B2B, the numeral 2, b2brevenue.com. I got a free ebook there. There's also a free course on LinkedIn profile development, and I do a free assessment for you there. Just go ahead and just log into that. There's no coupon code or anything. There is a coupon code for my course on how to use AI and nudge to really build your pipeline and the prospecting for you using AI. The coupon code for that is nudge. And for my partners at both Pipedrive and Nudge, there's a month free with the coupon code Brutal Truth, like in Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. Let's get into the interview with Tiffani, and at the end I'll sum it up and give you an update on what is going on with the courses. Hey, Tiffani, welcome back to the show. Give us a little update on yourself.
Well, Brian, thank you for having me back. Boy, I feel like it was yesterday and then years ago. All at the same time. Yeah, it's been wonderful since we last spoke. I have a book coming out on April 14th this year, and so I'm super excited about that. It's called Growthiq, and I've been heads down focused on that over the last 6 or 8 months. So I'm really excited to see it finally come to fruition.
And what was your motivation to write that?
I don't know if there was specifically a motivation to write it. I would say this. Like you, I get the opportunity to speak often at many events around the world, and there was many people that come up to me when I'd get off stage, or they'd drop me a note or something on LinkedIn or Twitter and say, oh, do you have a book out? Love to see a book. I want to learn more. And I got asked that over and over and over. And so, I finally said, boy, I really want to go down this journey with no understanding of what that really meant. But I said, sure, let's go for it for whatever reason. And so I wrote the book, and it was inspiring and frightening and exciting. And at the end of the process, when I finished recording the Audible of it, it was sort of cathartic, right? Because I got a chance to read the book out loud, right, beginning to end. Because you kind of see it in chunks and you know what it sort of says, but to really sit there and you can't kind of read a page. You have to read every word on every page. Yeah. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that it is a lot more work than it appears to be, mostly on the writing side. And I don't know about you, but, after the 15th time you go through a chapter, you're like, it's like, at the end of college or high school, you're like, can we have this over with, please?
Yeah, and you start getting caught in this perfection trap.
Yeah.
Like fixing and fixing and fixing and fixing. And then when you're done, you go, well, that's not at all what I wanted to say, because you've taken out all the really great stuff you'd put in.
So what is Growthiq? How do you characterize it?
Yeah, so for me, it was an opportunity to modernize many of the ways in which companies have approached growth in the past. Whether it's the Ansoff matrix, of going deeper into your customer base or accelerating into new markets or diversifying your customers or your products, like those kinds of concepts. And really modernizing it with the fact that, when that was done in 1957, we didn't have at our fingertips, right, the power that we have in our smartphones or in our cars or in our homes. And we didn't have retailers that could literally globally take orders and ship orders within minutes somewhere in the world, or build it on their way to your house, I mean, with sort of 3D technology. So I really felt like what was missing was, how do you actually reconcile all the different opportunities that you have in front of you as it relates to growth, regardless of what role you play in the company or even potentially what size you are. So I landed on 10 growth paths that really encapsulated both my own experience running sales, marketing, and customer service organizations, but then also when I was advising, tech companies, when I was a research fellow at Gartner, I started to see this pattern of people saying, Tiffani, we need help. And we need help this quarter. Like, I need to deliver results this quarter from a sales perspective. What can I do? And I used to say, the standard, well, you could always hire more salespeople, put more deals into the funnel, so spend more marketing. You could, potentially lower your price. You'd go to the normal dials of kind of like the 4 Ps, right? Like, you just sort of would go to the same dials. And what I noticed with companies that were really outperforming, like companies, sort of same industry, or outperforming just regular old softness in the market overall, I found that it was not necessarily the growth path they chose, while important, don't get me wrong, while important. It had everything to do with the combination and sequence in which they made those decisions around which one they're going to pick. And that was my big aha moment, right? That I would kind of deconstruct what people had done, and I go, oh, interesting. Like, it wasn't one single, silver bullet or one thing they did. And so I realized the one thing is, it's never one thing.
Well, I certainly agree with you there. And I've been on the sales and marketing side as well. And you see the same thing, January 1st or whatever the first day of the year is. It's, what's the growth rate? Then you just hire that number of people, cut up the territories, and it never seems to work, but everyone seems to do it. It's kind of like, if you want the pizza cooked in half the time, double the temperature in the oven. And that conventional thinking doesn't scale that well. And
yeah, well said. Well said.
Yeah. And I think in B2B, it's it's a lot different. You need somebody, a person, don't you, that's really thinking, a year and a half to 3 years ahead.
Yeah, and I don't know, I think that's a little overwhelming. I don't know. I personally, I mean, just even as human beings, 3 years ahead, you're kind of like, wow, that's a long time, right?
My point there is, because I look back and it's like the people who have been successful, mostly, on the internet and digital, they're first mover, or they got some traction early. The bloggers, the podcasters, the YouTube videos, the Instagram people, that they hit something, a little bit earlier than other people.
Yes.
Because you look at who are the successful bloggers. They've all been doing it 10 years.
Yes. Yeah. And I'd say this. I'd say, I often get asked, when I'm sort of giving my keynotes, people will say, who's doing a really good job around something like customer experience, right? And you can rattle off what companies, and one of my growth paths is actually customer experience, using that as a way to stimulate growth, both by attracting new sets of customers because you have a superior service, or driving loyalty into your existing base, right? Or even getting and earning permission to launch new products into that customer set because they expect a certain level of experience from you. And so I'd say that when I give that example, I give, the Jeff Bezos or the Mark Benioffs or the Steve Jobs, they have these great quotes around, it's all about the customer. And my response is, look, you don't have to be those guys where you see 10 years out, right? Or, who would have known when Steve Jobs said, I think that this is the way music's going to go, or the way a personal device is going to go. So far in advance was going to be right. But what I do need people to do is at least be like a half a year, 18 months.
Not the end of the quarter.
Not the end of the quarter of where they think their customers are going to be, right? And if they keep that in mind, and they're constantly making little pivots, just small little pivots, in making sure that they're staying aligned with their customer set, and what I say in the book is I call it context. And so the context of the market, has something changed, has a regulation changed, has a new competitor entered, right? You just want to stay on top of that. And then what growth path am I on? And is it still working and delivering the kinds of results? Or could I be starting to either slow down on one path and jump to another? Or does this path I'm on need some combination of something else, as an example? But if you're doing small little pivots along the way, then you don't end up, or I don't, right, would end up sitting down with a conversation going, oh my goodness, like I'm being Uberized, right? Like they've totally disrupted our industry, whomever they are. Yeah. And now I have to play catch up. Now you're catching up from such a disadvantage. So, understanding and keeping an eye on the context, to your point, it's maybe that you don't need to know exactly where you're going to be 3 years from now, unless you're one of those innovative visionaries in that way. But you at least need to be paying attention to what's happening in the here and now, because it'll start to give you indicators of where it may be going. And if you're wrong, by the way, if you've made small pivots, it's much easier to recover than you've put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, because what I see with a lot of CMOs and even CEOs is they are playing catch up. They're skating to where the puck was.
Yes.
And what they're finding is it's not working. Yeah, because the puck's no longer there. The puck's over here. And we all are making that bet, whether we admit it or not. We're investing our time today. You wrote a book. Right? You're talking about something that is going to affect you in the future, and you made that choice. And I'd say that it's kind of this intentional decision making. Yeah.
Right? Because I'm intentionally going to decide that I'm going to set aside some portion of my day or my week
life
on thinking about and reviewing, right? And it's hard for a sales leader. Look, when I was at Gartner, I coined the term seller's dilemma. And that dilemma was, to play off of Clayton Christensen, was how do you change the tires on a car going around the track 100 miles an hour, which is your quarterly numbers. And you can't stop the car and reorganize and retrain and launch technology and, go find new customers. You can't do all those things and simultaneously hit your numbers. It's difficult to carve out that time, like I just said, and really take pause and say, am I reframing the things that I'm doing today based on current conditions, or am I still looking through the frame of what it looked like 12 months from now when I made these decisions?
And that's it, because when we look around at the unicorns, it's kind of too late. And what you see is people copying them on almost every strategy, and that rarely works. Even if you look at Lyft and Uber, it's like when you see both medallions in their window, what's stopping them or me from starting up Brian's car sharing service, where I aggregate all their data and cut them out at one point? It's, the only thing that's stopping it is the actual infrastructure to build the app. What are your other elements of where you see, IQ applied to growth?
Yeah, you just mentioned one that's a big one. So one of the things I call out in the book is many have focused when looking for growth or feeling like they're starting to approach what I call a growth stall, right? Where they're starting to see a softness. Like we used to grow at 10 points year over year, and now it's 9, and then it's 8, and then it's 7. You know what I mean? And you're starting to see the steady decline, even if you're larger and there's this natural decline because you're bigger and you have to sell more. How am I going to buck that trend? And many go back to this muscle memory of, let me benchmark the competition, like you just said, right? Let me copy what, in that example, Uber and Lyft are doing and do Brian's rideshare, and how do I take share from them? And I'd say that is one of the great lessons learned in this. What I did in the book was I grabbed 30 case studies, so 30 different companies. Each path has 3 companies, 2 showing how were successful in using that path as a growth lever, if you will. And then 1 company who made the choice to use that path and it didn't work out for them, so that you could see the sort of the contrast of when it worked and when it didn't work. And one of the things that I realized was when they go to copy, and you just mentioned it, they copy the business model.
Yeah.
Right? They copy the business model. Like, I'm going to be an alternative to the taxi from point A to point B, or I'm going to open a coffee shop, and I'm going to copy the business model of a Starbucks. What they forget, or I'm an airline and I want to compete against Southwest, which has happened a number of times. Like, I'm just going to copy the business model, hub and spoke, 2nd, 3rd tier cities, and go and capture that share for an affordable price, et cetera. What they tend to forget is the mental model, which is you're not able to replicate, which has things like culture, right? Or, the things that are kind of their secret sauce. And I realized that the secret sauce, in my mind, was that combination and sequence. So if you're looking from the outside in, you only see, Lyft and Uber, and that's what they're doing, right? That business model. What you don't see is everything else they've combined it with. So if I pick Shake Shack, which is one of the stories in customer experience, you could say, well, they've just got really good burgers. And so I'll just open, another burger joint that has better burgers for a little bit less price. But what they have is they have great food. They have really high-end ingredients that match sort of his higher-end restaurants. They have radical hospitality as the culture. They have, the way in which they organize their stores and all of the other things that they have, and the way they train and inspire their employees to do what's best for the customer. Those are things that if you just looked at it, you'd be like, I'm just going to open a burger shop that's going to be a little less expensive and better, maybe better quality or a broader menu. And they forget that other side of the equation, which in Shake Shack's case is this concept of radical hospitality. So combined with a really great product and a strong brand that's driven loyalty because of its hospitality, i.e. its experience, that gets much more difficult to replicate.
Right. And like, I had the author of The Amazon Way on the show, and he shared it. It was the culture. It wasn't, one person. It was that the whole system and the way that they went about it at Amazon that is why they would win. and the focus on the client, but also the way that they could work together, which was very different than most larger companies, which I'm sure you've observed in your career.
Yeah, I actually use Amazon at the end of the book, I do a full case study on them as they've meandered their way through all 10 growth paths. Yeah. And right now, Jeff is sort of on the 10th, which the 10th growth path for me is called unconventional strategies, but it's really about kind of doing good by doing good or doing well by doing good. So sort of the philanthropic side of business, he's just starting to sort of go down that path. But everything else he's done and done really well. But it had everything to do with which path he chose in combination with other things and the order in which he did them.
Yeah.
And when it was a failure or it wasn't returning results, that it was very quickly killed and they moved on. And the whole concept of his day one philosophy, where going back to what you just said about kind of where the puck is going, companies that are touted as being very strong in customer experience, many argue that they've always been that way, right? So that's why Amazon keeps that day one philosophy, because that's the way they've always been, or Salesforce where I work, right? We've always had a giving back philosophy and a culture of Ohana. And so that's what we've always been. But if you have an organization that doesn't have those things already embedded and you have to change, it's much more difficult. So, that's where I think many struggle who have not pivoted to the customer or not thought about growth in new ways, right? That's just not the way their culture is built.
So if you don't have that maniacal leader, then the culture is the number two thing? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I'd say this. I'd say that whatever path they choose, right, if it's customer experience or, whether it's we're going to, make the we're going to reduce churn, which is another one of my chapters, which means that you have to just treat your existing customers, well, because everyone gets so focused on selling to net new customers that they forget about what I call the gold they already have, right? Like it's like if the guys who are coming to the West to, in the hunt for gold, found gold in a mountain and then said, yeah, that's nice. We're going to go to look now in this other mountain. That's kind of what it's like, right? Or do you just stay in the mountain where you found the gold and mine that gold? Why would you go looking for a new mountain and new gold that may not have the same level of results and spend all that money? It might take you years to find gold again.
Well, that's
that kind of concept, right?
Yeah. If you look in kind of the IT space where you have, a handful of key players and most of their strategy is acquisition. And, I've been through 12 startups. And most of them were acquired, even if they went public. And the strategy is monopoly strategy, Peter Thiel's thing, where you build a moat around your market. But then all of a sudden, this guy in Seattle, who the people who built that stuff were people I worked with, and they were like, "Well, we've got to build this infrastructure." And then all of a sudden, it becomes so valuable that boom. It becomes in and of itself an industry. So what I'm seeing, and then you take things like, Facebook and Snapchat. It's like, yeah, we can either acquire you or we can copy you. And where, the Snapchat CEO becomes essentially a quasi product manager for Instagram, because the developers just watch what they do and just, mimic it. So what I'm hearing is either you have that maniacal leader that finds a way of capturing that market through the base that they have, or they acquire it, like an IBM, which acquired two of the companies I worked at. I don't think they really came up with anything unique internally for as long as I can remember, but they would acquire it, and they had such a machine that they could acquire a $10 million company and in 3 years make a $120 million market out of it.
Yeah, and Growthiq absolutely focused on the top line growth side of a business versus capturing growth via M&A, because those are two very different things. So Growthiq was really all about how do you take what you currently have at your disposal. Are you optimized in the things that you're doing? Should you keep doing what you're doing? here are some examples of where others have gotten caught. Have you thought about the fact that it isn't the one thing, it's about the combination of things? And are you doing the right combination? And are there things that you could change potentially on the timing? Are you paying attention to the market context, right? Really just to sort of bubble up all these things that people don't tend to take a moment to reflect upon, as I said a little bit ago, and say, is what we're doing working? Because, especially if it's a small business listening, they may not have the capital to go and acquire. And I also see, there's one example I use in here in retail specifically when talking about Sears, that they went out to, as things started to get potentially more difficult for them from a growth perspective, and they went out and bought a company in Kmart that looked just like them. So did that actually achieve what they were looking for? Well, the thought was, we could take the stuff that we sell at Kmart and we could sell it at Sears and vice versa. But it's like, does Martha Stewart's needs to be in both places? It wasn't, I don't think it was a 1 + 1 = 3. And so, I think at the end of the day, acquiring to gain intellectual property or gain a capability you don't have today, I almost would say one of the other paths in the book is partnership, and another one is co-opetition. Do you partner with someone, in order to deliver an integrated solution, or let's say I use Kylie Jenner in the book. Did she go build a lab to make and distribute her lip kits? No, she found someone to private label so that, and then she was very involved in the color palette and all those things. And then is she going to handle the operations of distribution and fulfillment? She could have, but she didn't. Yeah. And so you have a $650 million business with less than 10 employees or something. I think it's 15. It's no more than 20. Bottom line is $650 million, 20 full-time employees. So did she need to go buy all that capability? If you look at Harry's, like the razor guys, right? Warby Parker, they decided they wanted to get into razors, and instead of just competing with Dollar Shave Club, they actually said, we're going to go buy the best razor maker in Europe. I think it was in either Russia or Germany. And so there's an instance where we're going to go buy that capability, but they absolutely could have private labeled it. They just chose not to. So you have to make those, going back to that intentional decision, like what's the best way for you to scale and get what you're looking for? Is it acquire? Is it partner? Is it work with somebody who you may feel today is sort of, a little bit of competition? So like Blue Apron doing a deal with Costco. You could almost argue that that's a little bit competitive, right? Because people go to Costco to buy food to go home and cook it. Now you're saying we're going to put full meal kits at Costco. But it doesn't mean that audience doesn't want a little bit of both, but is putting Blue Apron in Target the right idea, because is the Target customer base, the majority, the customer base, the right audience for a premium meal kit?
That's good. Yeah. So what will people get out of the book? Is it just ideas? Is it case studies? Is it a formula?
Yeah, so the formula is you need to know your context. You need to know in what combination you're going to do certain activities. And then you need to make sure that you understand the sequence. So there's a formula by which you can apply. Then there are, as I said, 30 case studies, 3 stories per path, 2 good, 1 cautionary tale. And then at the end of each path, there's sort of the key takeaways. Here are the things I think you should take away from that story that you could apply to your business, whether you're running a small sales organization, a small business, you're in a medium company, or even a large organization where you have a division or a particular product. So it was written to be very action-oriented and super applicable regardless of where you are in an organization, because I think even if you're a line manager and you don't have, a huge team reporting to you, if you just step back and go, wait a second, I've always done it this way and I'm only able to produce 100 a day. If I did it that way, could I produce 150 a day? Even something that simple can have huge implications upstream. But that goes back to your question about culture, right? The culture has to be willing to want to change. So as you said, do you need a charismatic, really focused leader to drive it, like a Bezos or a Benioff or a Musk or a, whomever, Jobs, etc. I think that that's important, but you can't just have one leader up there sort of doing this. Everybody has to be invested in this kind of change.
Excellent. And where do people go to get the book, connect with you, and learn more about your work?
Yeah, so the book is on sale online pretty much everywhere, and as well will be in bookstores. And then there's an audio version, there's a Kindle version or digital version. And you can find me on Twitter. I'm pretty active at Tiffany_Bova. And I'm LinkedIn, and I have a podcast called What's Next with Tiffany Bova. So right now I feel like it's kind of, I'm everywhere because we're just in,
Hey, so check out Tiffany's book. She's a really smart lady. One of the people I've really enjoyed talking with over the years. The second time I think she's been on the show. And I think the book is going to be really revealing. She really is a student of what is working. And her vantage point is very powerful because she's spent her career visiting companies at Gartner and now at Salesforce. So I think her vantage point is powerful. She's been a student of this, and I think her insights will really assist you in your growth strategy. To give you an update on the courses at b2brevenue.com, the prices are going up in September. I have customized them for companies now. So if you have a team, either in demand gen or in sales, I can show you exactly how to get into new accounts. Not the same old way, not this crazy cadence of 17 touches in 17 seconds that just annoys the hell out of everybody. This is a humanistic way, a systematic way that you can actually then automate. I know that's counterintuitive, but it really works. And, it leverages products like Nudge.ai and Pipedrive. Or whatever system you have. But what I show you is exactly how people want to be approached. Approach them in that way, build rapport with them, and then build interest that turns into action. And also, if your team is getting stuck on these larger enterprise deals, I've got the course Closing the Complex Sale. I'll also customize that for you. So if you're interested, there's a calendar link on the website under the training tab where you can pick a 15-minute slot. Please be serious. It's not for free consulting or anything. But if you're serious and you think it's a match for your company, I'd be happy to talk through it. So what it can be is anything from just the courses with the office hours, or it can be customized with N number of coaching sessions and customization sessions for your particular need over whatever time frame you feel would make the most sense. Also, if you could connect up with me on LinkedIn, that's kind of where I live, and I'd really appreciate anybody who shares my content on LinkedIn if you happen to see it go by. And if you could be a follower of the B2B Revenue podcast page, just search for that in LinkedIn. I tend to put out some funny videos there, and all the announcements about the podcast will be there, so you can follow that. Certainly appreciate it. We'll see you next time, and thanks for listening.